Good morning to our viewers, colleagues, people on the World Wide Web. Welcome to our Opposition Weekly Press Conference today, Wednesday. Personally, let me just apologize for the little bit of the late start. We had some technical issues and we had to solve that first. So that has been solved. So we're on a good footing this morning in our press conference. This morning, I'm joined by my colleague, the Member for Parliament for Naparima, Mr. Rodney Charles, who is on my right. Mr. Charles shadows foreign affairs issues and also our national security issues in our country. I also shadow energy and some of tourism. I will lead off this morning, and then Mr. Charles, MP Charles, will present issues on our security concerns that has been plaguing our country for the last 7 years, and more so what we have seen in the last few weeks, a different type of security concerns for our country. And I would call it as, and MP Charles will elaborate more, the pandemic in home invasions. And we have seen that especially over the last few days in our country. And there's no different this morning in the front pages of our national daily media, where citizens in one of the daily media, citizens are living in fear, and one of our leading cleric warns that criminals are large and in charge in our country. So MP Charles will elaborate a bit more on that. So my presentation is really in the energy sector and some issues that has propped up over the last few days in our country as far as finance is concerned. Today, I will be highlighting a matter of grave concern for each citizen: the destruction of generations of success in the energy sector, leading to the decimation of the national economy and the standard of living in our country. The area of focus which we believe the population need answers for, and accountability and transparency within our energy sector, are the lowest oil production in a generation, as recently highlighted by a newspaper. The failure of heritage production to replace the value of Petrotrin. This government's consistent failure to meet oil targets in the last 7 years. Answers on why the deep water bids continue to fail and where are the results of the last bids. This government has failed on incentives. Government has done nothing to spur on our oil production and gas production in the last 8 years. Despite oil prices increasing internationally, it will not benefit us in Trinidad and Tobago due to our collapse in our production. The effect of the removal of the fuel subsidy on the inflation and transport subsector, as highlighted by the Central Bank report of Trinidad and Tobago. Another area is this low oil production will support point 5 of the IMF report that growth is vulnerable and will lead to economic instability. And also, I would like to spend a little time on the status of the Naikwan plant, which what we will consider the World GTL plant that was given at peppercorn rate. And also, I'd like to also spend a little time on the performance of the Minister of Energy, Minister Stuart Young, as I think next week he will be, his term of office as Minister of Energy will be making 2 years. And I think also MP Charles, it will also be the 2-year, the second anniversary of the Minister of National Security, Fitzgerald Hinds, because they had 2 years ago, they had switched portfolios. So I don't know if you would like to also give a brief synopsis of his performance over the last 2 years, which I am doing this morning about Stuart Young. As oil prices remain high internationally, we in the opposition call out this government for causing the citizens of our nation to lose billions in potential revenue as they have driven our oil production to its lowest in 68 years. In 68 years, my brothers and sisters. And I just want to show a little graphic on the screen. Oil production lowest in generations. So it is not only opposition is saying this. It's an article that was in one of our daily newspapers over the weekend that research also shows this. So again, on Sunday, one of our daily newspapers confirmed what the opposition has been warning the people of Trinidad and Tobago about for the last 7 years since this PNM government has taken over running this country. For the last 7 years, we have warned this country that the government reduced exploration, their lack of incentives, and reduced activity would harm the economic well-being of our nation. With production for 2022 at approximately 58,000 barrels per day, it means that despite all the big talk and empty promises by Minister Young, the last time production was this low in Trinidad and Tobago was back in 1952. Today I tell Minister Young and the government, stop blaming and using the excuse of we are a mature province. The reality is that they have done absolutely nothing to increase production. The figures for rig days and acreage drilled have plummeted in the last 7 years under this government, showing fully well that this government has sat lazily by and allowed production to slip away for the last 7 years. And I want to say to Minister Young, it is time to talk less and start to perform, because it is 2 years you will be at the helm as the Minister of Energy. Today, while our CARICOM neighbors are enjoying the benefits of high oil production, the people of this nation must know that our production and our place as the oil capital of the Caribbean has collapsed due to the baseless decisions of this Rowley regime to shut down Petrotrin. I want to show an article that is on the screen, that will be on the screen, that Imbert, and it's a statement by one of the media, Imbert, Petrotrin, Trinidad and Tobago's best chance for increased oil production. So Imbert back then, in 2017, in an energy conference, was stating that Petrotrin was Trinidad and Tobago's best chance for increasing oil production. Those were the words of Minister of Finance Imbert. The Minister of Finance, and I quote, stated then in 2017, you should know that the major oil producer in Trinidad and Tobago at this time is Petrotrin, which accounts for almost 50% of the country's total production. Petrotrin is therefore the key to improved oil production in Trinidad and Tobago in the short and medium term. These were the words of Minister Imbert in an energy conference in Trinidad and Tobago back in 2017. But what did this government do 1 year later in 2018? There were no joint ventures. There were no strategies for Petrotrin. They just shut down and closed down Petrotrin and our refinery. The Petrotrin betrayal haunts us as a nation because you have the evidence that we are losing out on billions in potential revenue at these high oil prices. While the fuel and foreign exchange security of this nation have been eroded, as we have to import our fuel now and use valuable foreign exchange for the import of our fuel. Despite all the boasts by the government in November 2018 that Heritage Petroleum, one of the new companies formed by this government, would reverse the decline in oil production, this company, Heritage Petroleum, has failed in the last 4 years to replace the value of Petrotrin. The fact is, when they had shut down Petrotrin and sent home all the workers, they sent home the knowledge, the experience and skill which built our oil industry. Today, this government cannot identify one single procedure, process or method that this is being done differently by Heritage compared to Petrotrin. What they have done with these companies, Heritage and Paria, what they have done, they have destroyed the union, OWTU, have sent home all the skilled workers, and what they have done now is farm out the labor to private individuals who would then bring in their labor to work in these companies, Heritage and Paria. And we have seen the issue with Paria and the debacle and the disaster that happened in Paria because of this situation of, I would say, workers with incompetent workers. Has the government, I want to say that, has the government simply given up on increasing oil production? In our budget 2022 was the first time in decades that the Minister of Finance failed to give the oil production targets for our country. Today I call on the Minister of Energy and the Prime Minister to tell this country, why did you allow our oil production and gas production to fall at these low levels? How could the Prime Minister and the Minister of Energy boast on the international stage about Trinidad and Tobago being an oil and gas province, yet never achieving a single production target in 7 years, not once? So the Minister of Energy and the Prime Minister have never achieved their targets that they had promised this country over the last 7 years. How could the Prime Minister and the Minister of Energy, Minister Young, being fully aware that our revenue depends on oil and gas, fail to take the necessary action to reverse the decline year after year? All they do is every year talk and do not perform. The energy sector is not only becoming tired of the persistent, deceiving promises of proper incentives to find deep water oil and gas, but the stakeholders are now moving away from Trinidad and Tobago as they realize that this government has zero interest in making our sector, the energy sector, attractive or competitive. Minister Imbert, Minister Young, and Prime Minister Rowley are fully aware that the key to this country's oil and gas is in the deep water. Yet they have failed year after year to introduce proper package incentives which would enable companies to explore the deep areas. Today we call on the Minister of Energy to tell this country why the results of the bid round from June 2022 have been delayed. This bid was closed on June the 3rd, 2022, and the results as stipulated by the Ministry of Energy were supposed to be announced 3 months after. Despite the bid failing, with only 4 of the 17 blocks receiving bids, what has happened to those bids? Is it that the government will reject this bid? Is it that the terms are not attractive to the companies who have placed bids? So we have seen failure after failure under Minister Young. No longer are energy companies willing to listen to the hollow promises of the finance minister budget after budget about incentives when they have a more viable, attractive option in our next door neighbor, Guyana. This Rowley-led government has deprived the people of Trinidad and Tobago from enjoying the benefits of high oil prices, as the crippling of our oil production means that we do not have the commodity to maximize revenue for our people of Trinidad and Tobago and to maintain the standard we are accustomed to. As a matter of fact, higher oil prices can even be more catastrophic for our economy, as fuel prices could increase globally, pushing prices up in Trinidad and Tobago given the government's cutback on the fuel subsidy. Importantly, the country must not allow the Minister of Finance to deceive us into thinking higher oil prices means that its budget or revenue targets would be achieved, because he is on record stating that only 1/3 of our revenue comes from oil, and the major amount of our revenue comes from natural gas. And I want to state in the budget of debate in 2022, on the 12th of October 2022, Minister Imbert in the Senate stated, and I quote, "There are a number of agencies that forecast oil price, and the consensus at the time, and it is still is that the forecast for oil in 2023 is $95 a barrel. So we shall see how it goes." I go on. This is a quote from Minister Imbert. "I suspect our oil price may be just on target or maybe slightly above, and I am fairly confident that our gas price is below. And since we get 2/3 of our revenue from gas and 1/3 from oil, I think our revenue estimates are well calculated." These are the words of Minister Imbert. And today the price of gas is $2.16, and the price of oil is approximately $81 a barrel. And in our budget in 2022, Minister Imbert had pegged our gas price at $6, and today it is $2.16. And Minister Imbert will come and tell this country again tomorrow in response to the opposition that we have a basket of goods in how we calculate our natural gas price. And I want to tell Minister Imbert, no matter how, now Minister Imbert likes to play with statistics and figures, and no matter how he twists it, reality is reality. The price of gas is $2.16 on the international market today. The decimation of our energy sector has had a detrimental impact on every citizen of this nation. The collapse of the energy sector has led this government to cut the fuel subsidy, which has affected inflation, has skyrocketed food prices, and made it more expensive for you to travel. Disregard the misleading picture of the finance minister. The central bank has shown us fully how prices have been impacted by the price of fuel. The Central Bank Economic Bulletin, January 2023, page 30 tells us, and I quote, the transport sub-index jumped to 14.6% in November, compared to 5.9% in June. So in essence, the central bank is saying that because of the high cost in our fuel prices at the pump, transportation costs have increased, MP Charles. Yep. And everything by a domino effect has also increased. But Minister Imbert and the Minister of Trade will come and tell you otherwise. The high cost of fuel continues to rip through people's income and preventing many from meeting day-to-day expenses. Today we want the Prime Minister to say why he has not lived up to his promise of reducing the price of fuel when the oil price fell. The Prime Minister in his budget debate on the 4th of October 2022 told us as a country, and I quote, if the average price was $85, premium will drop to $6.92. Super will drop to $6.66. If it drops to $80 for the cost of a barrel of oil on the international market, premium drops to $6.28. Super drops to $6.05. And if it drops further, MP Charles, to $75 a barrel, premium will drop to $5.68 and super will drop to $5.43. So super between $87 and $77, a price of a barrel of oil, the price will drop to $6.97 to $5.43. So in essence, what the Prime Minister was stating back in October 2022, when oil prices were high, he was given the undertaking to this country in his budget debate that if the price of oil dropped on the international stage, MP, that the people of Trinidad and Tobago would feel the correction effect at the pump. So that means that we have been seeing over the last few months price of oil under $80 a barrel, but we have seen no correction at our gas station and the prices that we pay on a daily rate. So in the past few months, the price has dropped below $80, and we have seen no change at the pump. The Prime Minister also promised to post the average price of fuel each month in his budget debate. You were there. So he said, and I quote, at the end of the month, the government will look to see what was the average price of fuel during the month, and we'll post that for the month ahead, and then we'll do the same thing. So we are still waiting. So these are just promises by this government for the last 7 years. And we as a population, some of the business people fall for that rhetoric, and they do not do the proper checks and balances. The media who are here need to call out this government on their promises that they made in the budget. 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Finance described the IMF report as a positive outlook. But there can be no positive outlook when the collapse of our energy sector sparks grave concern from the issues highlighted in item 5 of the IMF concluding statement. And I have my chief economist here with us this morning, Tahaka Obika, and he will substantiate. Item 5 of the IMF concluding statements tells us the balance of risk to growth is tilted to the downside. Downside risks stem from potential disruption to domestic oil and gas production, a sharper than expected global slowdown affecting energy markets, and global financial instabilities. On the upside, there is a potential for the higher than expected energy production and prices, including from a new license regime to Trinidad and Tobago to develop a major gas field in Venezuela. This was the IMF report, and I will expand a bit on that major gas field in Venezuela. With oil and gas production at the bottom of the barrel, Trinidad and Tobago is headed, in our view, for another year of no growth, no matter what is said in the papers, or economic instability. This means more economic hardship for the people of our nation. The reality is, MP Charles, the dragon gas is not going to happen anytime soon. As up to this day, the government cannot answer when first gas will be received from the Venezuelan government, or whether or not there have been any conclusion in that dragon gas deal that we have been seeing, that was first talked about by this Prime Minister earlier this year. It's not the opposition talked about it. It is the Prime Minister, and all of a sudden, the Prime Minister has gone silent on this entire dragon gas deal. Every week, if you read in the papers as the international affairs shadow, MP Charles, you will see every week in Venezuela, one of the energy czars either resigning or some issue with corruption or surround them, right? Now, I want to turn a little bit, MP Charles, on Naikwan plant. And I don't know if my colleague here could just show what you are seeing here is our Naikwan plant, which was the WGTL plant that was sold to Naikwan and the players at a peppercorn price, MP Charles. And I want to ask, on behalf of the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, we call on the Minister of Energy to tell the population if the Naikwan plant is operating or has been shut down for the past 3 months. That is the information we have, that the plant has been shut down. Taxpayers are entitled to accountability on the Naikwan because of the national concession which Naikwan Energy received from our government, not the state, from this government. Never forget, Naikwan obtained the $2 billion gas to liquid plant, which taxpayers' money was squandered on by Malcolm Jones. They want us to forget that, MP Charles. Never forget, Naikwan received a preferential agreement for the supply of gas from the minister's share of natural gas in 2018. And most importantly, its operations were propelled by a 25-year take-or-pay offtake agreement with Petrotrin. Take-or-pay agreement, right? The Minister of Energy, Stuart Young, must tell this country, is Naikwan producing low-sulfur fuel for the market successfully as promised, or is the product off spec, meaning it is high in sulfur? It is difficult to sell on the international market. My information has told me that to date, Naikwan has sold nothing, has exported zero on the international market. The government must tell this country, after all these major concessions from the state, is Naikwan actually offering value for money for our country? Is Naikwan even offering a proper return on investment, especially after that lengthy shutdown due to the explosion in 2021 in that area of Petrotrin? And to date, I, as the MP for Pointe-a-Pierre, have never made known what was the cause of that blast. And even the people of the environments, like especially Batu and Marabella area, we are still waiting what caused that blast. During the opening of Naikwan on the 8th of March 2021, Prime Minister Rowley stated, recognizing the Naikwan project as an opportunity for the country to gain some benefits from an investment which otherwise could not have been operationalized, the government facilitated, meaning the Rowley government, facilitated this project by sourcing and securing a supply of gas to the plant to a maximum of 31 MMSCF per day. So in essence, what this government under Prime Minister Rowley was taking 31 MMSSC per gas per day and giving it to this Nykwan plant, okay, at preferential rate. Today we ask the Prime Minister, what benefit has Nykwan brought to the people of this nation? In light of a gas shortage, to Point Lisas, and high gas prices, have the people of Trinidad received proper return for this gas? Given that the government has $25 million worth of preference shares in this investment in Nykwan, they must tell the population, has Nykwan been operational for the last 3 months, and has Nykwan met its financial obligation, debts, etc. to Republic Bank Limited in Trinidad and Tobago? We have concerns, MP Charles, about that whole issue. And I call on the former permanent secretary at the Ministry of Finance and Nykwan Vice Chairman Alison Lewis, who was also a board member of Republic Bank when the funding for Nykwan was approved, must answer if Nykwan is meeting its debts to Republic Bank, or is the government funding this debt? We ask, we only ask, because if they're not funding the debt to Republic Bank, we are the owners of Republic Bank, the shareholders and taxpayers of this country. And we have seen the issue with the banking sector in the States a few months ago, MP Charles. So we ask these questions about Nykwan. Now, as I conclude, as I started off, MP Charles, in 1 week's time, I think Minister Young will be his second year as the Minister of Energy. And I think the Minister of everything in this country. Right? And also, Minister Hines will make his second anniversary as the Minister of National Security because they swapped. And I want to just highlight some of the Minister of Energy, Stuart Young, under his tenure as the Minister of Energy for the past 2 years. And there's nothing to boast about. There has been no improvement. And I asked my colleague just to show, this is Minister Young, if you forgot what he looks like. There has been, under Minister Young, there has been no improvement in our gas production or crude oil. No improvement. Our production are the lowest in oil since 1952. Atlantic Train 1, remember Atlantic Train 1, where they spent over $240 million? Atlantic Train 1 plant still remain closed today. Under Minister Young, 2 failed bid rounds. Under Minister Young, right? The Dragon gas is still unknown. And Minister Young was the one back in 2017, was the man in charge and the cheerleader for that. Under Minister Young, our Point Lisas plant struggled to get gas. Under Minister Young, I want to state, the refinery, our Petrotrin refinery, is still closed. It has not been sold or leased, and it is deteriorating at a fast rate. When as the MP for Point De Pierre, MP Charles, when I drive, it breaks my heart to see the condition of that area. Under Minister Young, if we were producing at least what they had promised this country, at approximately 4 billion of standard cubic feet of gas, we would have been earning revenue over $1.5 billion today based on the kind of prices that on the international market. And what that has caused, our standard, because they have not kept their word, our standard of living has been deteriorating at a rapid rate. We don't have a middle income family base anymore, MP Charles. Under Minister Young, in 2020, for the first time in our country, NGC recorded a $2.1 billion loss. Remember that, MP Charles? Yep. So when you look at the performance, and I am sure I am just touching on some of the issues of his performance under Minister Young. So we are saying to Minister Young, talk less, do the work. That's what we're saying to Minister Young, because he loves to talk. He loves to talk. He's never short of talk. So we are saying your performance has been terrible, has been a disaster in the Ministry of Energy for the past 2 years. And I was listening to a colleague last night, MP Charles, and they said, I wouldn't say it, but this has been one of the worst performing ministers of energy under any PNM government. And I leave it so. Those are not my words, MP Charles. So I conclude. 2 months ago, the Prime Minister offered his expertise to our Caribbean neighbors in monetizing and optimizing their hydrocarbon resources. Today, we want to tell the Prime Minister, get real and fix Trinidad and Tobago energy issues first. And before I end, MP Charles, today in the papers has caused me concern. In today's papers, I see in the Express, in one of the business media, Caribbean Airlines is poised to buy more planes. Now, that is a concern for me. Because under this government, they love to buy boats and planes. And they are now preparing to buy more planes for Caribbean Airlines without the proper procurement legislation in place. And that is a grave concern for us as an opposition. And all citizens of this country should be concerned that this government is trying to procure another set of valuable assets without the proper procurement legislation in place. With those few words, I rest for now, and I would like to turn over to MP Charles. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, my colleague, for your comprehensive analysis of the mismanagement of the energy sector. Not only that, but you articulated very clearly the incompetence of the Minister of Energy. In fact, I was not aware that it was a 2-year anniversary. And I was not aware how incompetent he was until you, by line, indicated the level of mismanagement and competence of the energy sector and the impact on our economy and all our lives as a result of his inability to do the job. But before I begin my part of this morning's news conference, and before I deal with our terrible crime situation, and I think it's all over the press, all over, citizens living in fear, lockdown in Valsine, etc. Lockdown in Valsine. Let me touch a bit on that monument of national shame, profligacy, decadence, opulence, malfeasance, and money laundering and corruption. That edifice that you see, that shame is Balize House. That $100 million monstrosity is a symbol of all, MP Lee, all that is wrong with Trinidad and Tobago. It is a conspicuous, very possible symbol of kickbacks from awards of government contracts. That building, that monstrosity, that $1 million edifice to glorify opulence, profligacy, and decadence. It is a conspicuous symbol of kickbacks, of inflated contracts, of delinquent procurement procedures by state agencies, of possible commingling of materials from legitimate projects to others, of slipshod work on government contracts, and most likely greedy financiers hoping for a fast return on a political investment. That is what that building symbolizes, and we must never forget it. It is the single most important reason why we need campaign finance reform, MP Lee. Today we renew our call for Prime Minister Keith Christopher Rowley to release the list of donors to the project. Be transparent, Mr. Prime Minister. Be 21st century. Be like your Singaporean colleagues. Release the bloody list of donors. But we suspect that he cannot release that list because it will reveal that all is rotten in the state of Denmark. So we join the call of the political leader of the UNC, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, for a commission of inquiry into Balize House project. It will be among the first acts of a new UNC government come 2025. Dr. Lee, I'm sure you will be in that government, and therefore remember the call this Sunday for a commission of inquiry. Let the chips fall wherever they may. Let them fall. So this morning, we placed all Balize House donors on notice that if they make legitimate donations, then they have nothing to fear. If you made a legitimate donation to Balize House, that is your right as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. But any skullduggery used in the project will be revealed, as the scripture says, in the fullness of time. Donors blessed with large state contracts linked to their donations will know that justice takes time, but it's eventually delivered. A word to the wise is sufficient. Decades ago, Trinidad and Tobago taxpayers funded the multi-million-dollar O'Halloran Towers in Toronto. Remember that, Dr. Lee?
I wasn't born yet.
No, you weren't born yet. Yeah. My age group will know that. We funded a multi-million-dollar O'Halloran Towers in Toronto. In 2010, concerns were raised about Manning's Church for a prophetess in the heights of Guanapo. And today, questions regarding the funding of Balize House are being studiously deflected. PNM good at that, Create a distraction. Start a whole talk here. So you forget the little bubble that running with Balize House. So I asked Trinidad and Tobago, connect the dots, my friends, and see that corruption in the construction of vanity projects by the PNM at home and abroad, as in Toronto, is all part and parcel of the PNM DNA. It is in their DNA. I was there, and I know how the PNM operates in these matters. Whether it is the Lockjoint scandal, and you would know that, Dr. Lee, the Lockjoint scandal, I was in primary school then. The gas station racket, secondary school then. The Tesoro scandal, I was in sixth form then. The Darrell Smith hush payment, I was in Parliament then. You name it, and the PNM is pocketing money somewhere. That is how. I was part of the PNM. That's how we operate. And we blame the opposition while we doing mischief. PNM is the author and finisher of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. The alpha and the omega, as the scripture says. And I want to make the point that Balize House is a catalyst for crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Let me repeat that. Balize House is a catalyst for crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Read today's newspapers, and it is littered with crime stories. Pastor Dutton tells us criminals are taking over. It's Pastor Dutton. Criminal citizens living in fear. Cleric warns criminals.
Sure.
Yeah. Cleric warns criminals large and in charge. Calls on Minister COP to offer comfort, work with the population. Right? Newsday. Lockdown Valsine. Right? We have in Newsday murders on a highway. Murders on a highway. Right? Newsday again. All over the place. Yet another home invasion. This time in Davie. Where are we going? So Valsine residents want to lock down their community. Israel Khan and Aboud call for a state of emergency. The Chinese embassy condemns killing of Chinese businessman Ding Zhang Zhu. Have I pronounced that correctly?
Yes,
right. Very good. We may well ask as Jesus did, as he faced death. My God, why have you forsaken Trinidad and Tobago? When youthful gang members see PNM big boys living high off the hog on projects like Balize House, these little youth boys tell themselves, as a calypso reminds us, if the priest could play, who is we? If PNM ministers can recuse themselves 40 and 50 times from cabinet meetings just so, and see nothing wrong with that, then who is we? The young boys are telling themselves, this is Jah put Trinidad for all of we. And if them could recuse, we could take. If PNM attorneys get multi-million-dollar briefs at the drop of a hat with no proper procurement procedure in place, then the young people ask, who is we? It is a legitimate question for them. I don't agree with that you should follow criminals. I'm not saying that who get the briefs are criminals, but I'm saying if the process looks to them as not fully sanctimonious, that's how it looks to them, then they act based on their perception. If a cabinet minister can walk away with $23 million culo brizo every year in state rentals and gallery himself all over the country, then if Faris can play, who is we? And if Prime Minister Rowley can index his pension for the rest of his mortal life, then if Rowley could play, the little boy say, who is we? And if Balize House can allegedly be built by taxing state contractors, then why should the school bully not impose a tax on the lunches of his schoolmates? Now tell me, when you do, people look on, and when they act, you ask why. Does God make them act? So this is what they see. What they see, they practice. So crime starts at the top, and Balize House is the preeminent symbol of this criminality. Maybe this is the reason why the government is dragging its feet on accusations of senior government officials being complicit in human trafficking. So, ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to the report of Commissioner of Police Ola Christopher, and hope that it will impartially examine evidence from both sides, all sides of the political and other divides in the country. Her report must be apolitical, comprehensive, include the financing of Balize House, and be done without fear of her contract not being renewed next month. It's May, I think. Yeah, it's May. She'll be 60 years old. I now go to a pandemic of home invasions. Today, Trinidad and Tobago stands at an inflection point regarding crime and criminality. We are all in this together. Very PNM phrase, we are all in this together. We will soon reach the point where almost everyone, every Trinidadian, will either be a victim of, or know someone, or have a close relative who is a victim of serious crime. It's just a matter of time. You see it in the papers. Sooner or later, we think we could hide and get away. It's going to come on our doorsteps. All of us will be victims of crime, except perhaps the big boys. The big boys, they already call them the big kayaki kings in our country. All PNM big boys will be protected. So you see, they do not feel crime in the way the average citizen feels it, because they walk around with 24/7 security guards. So let's look at the data. The murder rate now stands at 160. Last year, this time it was 139. You see where we're going? This year, under the failed Fitzgerald Ethelbert Heights, we will witness over 700 murders. Talk about the Minister of Energy. I think Heinz worse. Although, I think they're equal. They're fighting for last place. Heinz has run out of excuses. he must either resign or be fired. Straight case. If Trinidad and Tobago is to have any semblance of normalcy, Hines has to resign. So we ask the question, what is the power he has over Prime Minister Keith Christopher Rowley? What is the reason? Pilate, he said that crime is not his responsibility. Now he tells us with a straight face that is because we have a affinity for pornography. Well, I don't, We have affinity. His boss tells us that it's because of the spouses we choose. They say crime has always been with us. They blame everybody else except their gross incompetence, their ineptitude, their laziness, their slothfulness, their dunce-headedness. There's a word they do not like me to use, but plain talk, bad manners. The PNM is composed of a whole set of dunce-headed people. When will we ever learn that this PNM administration is failing us on everything imaginable? We had energy this morning. Very articulate, very clear, data-driven. They're failing us on energy. They're failing us on education. They're failing us on crime. When will we ever learn? You know that song? When will we ever learn? Even if Rowley takes over the Ministry of National Security, it will make no difference. He too is bereft of ideas on anything, including crime. When will we have the testicular fortitude, the political cojones to tell Rowley that enough is enough? You know what? They lie, and with a straight face tell us that only murders are up, but crime is down. Murders up, but crime is down. That is a big fat lie. Crime is bursting through the roof in every areas of our life. The anecdotal and other evidence is there for all to see. Burglaries, vehicle thefts. I hope my car downstairs is safe. Predial larceny, missing persons, human trafficking, trafficking in drugs, trafficking in minors, rape, you name it, and the records are daily being broken. We headed for, I do not know. Let's take missing persons. Sunday, 21st February 2021, Guardian reported frighteningly that for a number of years prior to 2019, here the number of people, 8,383 people went missing. Out of that number, 408 was still not found at the end of 2019. What is the number of missing persons today? This has been, for all of us, from our different religious perspectives, a time for prayer and reflection. Yet, no amount of prayers can help Trinidad and Tobago under a clueless Rowley administration. We have to face it. We have to face it. Scripture reminds us in the book of James that faith without works is dead. Yeah. Where is the effort, the intellect, the work done by this inept PNM administration to back up their calls for divine intervention? You can ask God to help, but you do the work, and God rewards you with the work you do. But if you do not work, we are told that there is no salvation. Faith without works is dead. So we are under attack, inside and outside our homes. It all came to a head this weekend. The PNM, living in gated communities and provided with state-funded 24/7 security, do not see or feel crime the way we do. They are protected. And this begs the question, how many ministers and senior government officials are provided with special state-funded security? Who are these ministers and senior government officials? And you know what? I challenge Dr. Rowley, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, to walk down High Street in San Fernando after 8 p.m. without security. I challenge him. Please, Prime Minister, do not wear a gold chain if you are minded to take up the offer. Now I ask the question, can Prime Minister Rowley do so on Charlotte Street after 8 p.m. at night? I challenge Fitzgerald Hines to visit Beetham Estate without his security detail any time of the day. He wisely declined. So they do not feel crime the way the average citizen does. They read about it in the newspapers or on Facebook. But we citizens witness it every day in front of our eyes. No bandit, however intoxicated or crazy, will ever get it in his head to invade the homes of Hines, Young, or Imbert. So therefore, they speak from an ivory tower. And these are a sprinkling of headlines on home invasions this week. But before that, I want for us to experience graphically what it actually means for citizens to experience a home invasion.
Home invasion around West Bandits and my mother them upstairs, Ramlan Street. Please, all the help faster, please. Bandits upstairs with my mother and my children upstairs, please. I don't know how much of them. Please help fast. Somebody in Ramlan Street extension, Maggie Parlor. Help, please. Anybody help? Help, please. Oh God, I don't know how much of them upstairs and my children upstairs. Please help. Ramlan Street around West. Help, please. Home invasion around West Bandits and my mother.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is how the majority of citizens Trinidad and Tobago, those are the experiences we have on a daily basis. It is not pleasant. I do not know how my heart bleeds for that lady. It's a children. And yet, this government does not care. We had home invasions in Kumutu, where a husband and wife were assaulted and robbed by 4 men. Retired Assistant Transport Commissioner and his female companion were beaten, robbed. An 18-year-old locked herself in a bathroom during a home invasion in Mausika. In spite of the bad news, we commend Senior Superintendent Edwards and Inspector Sunil Bharat for their prompt response to the home invasion, that home invasion in Arambas. The perpetrators were arrested within an hour, and I hope they get the justice that they deserve. I know of good police officers in the Southern Division where I live and work. They're all trying their best with very limited resources. How much better our police would perform if equipped with all the tools and technologies available to modern police officers to detect, intercept, and arrest criminals. How can they follow fleeing criminals without vital air support from our near-defunct Air Guard? You see, Fitzgerald Hines said his job is to provide equipment, but he cannot provide aerial support to help those officers as they track down the fellows running away from the crime. Every department under Fitzgerald Hines speaks to chaos, mismanagement, blunder after blunder, and VAPs. This is like, it's best we hand first primary school children to run the Ministry of National Security. They can't do a worse job. Whether it be the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Army, the Coast Guard, Immigration, the Prison Service, the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, all, as Espinay said, all in crisis. Our fire service is in total shambles due to faulty or non-functioning equipment, especially appliances. You ask Fitzgerald Hines, I asked Fitzgerald Hines months ago in Parliament about the maintenance of fire appliances and he assured the country that everything was okay. He made me look like I was crazy. I didn't know what I was talking about, and I have the videos to show him. I asked him about reports from a former chief fire officer that 50% of fire plants were not fully functional. And he told me point blank in my face, it was not true. I don't humble myself in Parliament because all you could do is ask a question. If the minister say, I'm not talking the truth, then you go home and you question yourself. You read the paper again. Did I read wrongly? But Hines has not learned that facts are stubborn things. They do not go away. You may BS yourself. You may BS your way in Parliament and think you're smart, but facts are stubborn things. Yesterday's Trinidad Guardian editorial bemoaned that there are only 90 lifeguards in a country for approximately 80 beaches. So if in Trinidad, if you cannot swim, swim in the sand. Because as far as Hines is concerned, who live, and who dead. So in conclusion, my colleague spoke about the total collapse of the Ministry of Energy in terms of output, performance, delivery, the capability, the sectors are not functional. We had some that a facility that has not delivered an ounce of exports to earn foreign exchange. Hines is worse, he's fighting for last. So we plead with the Keith Rowley administration to examine seriously our ideas on how to reduce crime. Our political leader, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, has outlined a comprehensive crime plan. I have read it. There is merit in the plan. I have given that plan to persons in Harvard University and Yale, and they say, well, this is workable. This is eminently sensible. But tell that to Keith Rowley, PNM. So I tell Dr. Rowley, you don't have to like our plan. Don't just ignore them. Then accuse us of not being supportive. The concept of splitting, and I'll just give one example. The plan is available. We could make it available to the media. The concept of splitting the Ministry of National Security into two separate ministries makes eminent sense. Singapore does it. Why can't we? We need two distinct ministries. The Ministry of Home Affairs responsible for internal security, and also the Ministry of Defense responsible for the Defense Force, Coast Guard, border security. Under this arrangement, the TTPS and Fire Service, for example, will get focused attention. You have a minister who is looking at that, not one who is spread all over the place, and he's giving answers just to keep you quiet. But yet the system collapses. Fitzgerald Hines cannot handle both aspects of his portfolio. Plain and simple. Every aspect of his portfolio is collapsing. Prison services, if you talk to the Prison Service Second Division Office Association, they tell you it is on collapse. If you talk to any section, it is in collapse. He clearly cannot handle the two portfolios. Yet he hangs his hat where his hands cannot reach, and all of us paying the price. There are other aspects of the crime plan, but arrogant Fitzgerald Ettelberg Hines will not even read our excellent plan, and our country continues to suffer. May God, in his infinite mercy, grant our citizens the wisdom and courage to vote out this administration, so that Trinidad and Tobago will rise up again and assume its rightful place as a country flowing with milk and honey, and of which we can all be justly proud. It must be restored to be in a place where we can raise our children and grandchildren in love, safety, peace, and security. And my last word to Trinidad and Tobago: you cannot, with your finger, do a particular action and expect God to help us. You have to work so that your faith can be made manifest. And I end with the last word of a Calypsonian who died recently. We can make it if we really try. I thank you.
Thank you, MP Charles, for your passionate, presentation here this morning on the security issues that is plaguing our country. And I want to say in a nutshell, and I think you would agree, MP Charles, that the way the crime is in our country, no one is untouchable. I think that it clearly shows, to me, how we are going in our country, that crime is just a matter of time. And it's sad to say this. It's just a matter of time that crime will touch every one of us. Because before, some people would feel that they're insulated, but if you go through our malls, I mean, you could have been going to the airport on Monday night, and by the traffic lights by Piarco turning to go to the airport, and they had a big shootout right there. And your life could have been taken based on, that situation, that crime is rampant. And I agree with Pastor Dutton that the criminals are large and in charge in our country. And this always happens when a PNM government is in place. Mm-hmm. So with those few words, I don't know if the media has any questions.
One or two small ones actually. Without referencing any particular personality, the leadership of the police service, as you mentioned, there's a retirement age at 60, and it's a little shocking. I know they say for government ministers it usually takes about 2 years for a government minister to find his or her feet generally. And if a person has just been there, 2 or 3 or 4 months, and then this lady may be retiring soon. Now, I'm kind of not referencing that particular personality, but to me, there seems to be a question of if they should keep these persons on for a longer time, and with all the training that they have and so on, that they should. I don't know if there's any thoughts on that, because it's like this constant turnover of commissioners.
Yeah, but I think we have to be fair. We have to hold the commissioner of police to account, right? We have to ensure that she's impartial, and she does not use the fact that she's fearful that Dr. Rowley will fire her, and therefore she obeys him. She'll end up like a puppet. Now we have to hope that she's a professional, that she will operate with dignity and impartiality. But I think, given all that has taken place, I think it may, to not renew her contract will be a disservice to her. In my view, she does not have chance. We took that decision in Parliament when we voted her in. Voted to assume the post, knowing full well that this would arise, right? So once that has happened, it is critical for us to give her a chance. I think the law says she has three extensions annually based on performance. The problem we have with that, as a general principle, is that Dr. Rowley likes everybody subordinate and beholden to him. Under normal situation, it could work. I trust that Dr. Rowley will not use that power to put undue pressure on Commissioner Christopher. And if he does, I have hope as a patriot and as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago that she will be professional enough to tell Rowley that her actions will be guided by principle and policies and what is right. And that is why Trinidad is always in this, things are not strict, things are not, in a way, managerially predictable. It is always under the PNM. They always want a president who is beholden. They want a commissioner who is beholden. And the last point, we are going to see whether Commissioner Christopher is impartial, because she's committed to doing a report on human trafficking. And if that report is one-sided, then we will make our judgment. Then Rowley has prevailed. If it is balanced, professional, and defensible, we will know that she's a person of principle and good ethics.
If I would just add to Sean to what your question. This is where the Police Service Commission, in my view, comes into play. When they would have interviewed the present Commissioner of Police and all the other applicants, they would have asked and they would have known if she had scored number 1, which she did in the assessment, and they would have known that she was retiring in May. They would have asked her what was her plan in the whole crime fighting issue up until retirement, and maybe the media should call for that, that report or what was said, and that it was convincing to the Police Service Commission what she would have done to eradicate or reduce the crime in our country up until retirement, because she would have been guaranteed a position up until retirement. So that would have played in her assessment marks, in my view, unless it's something different. That if I was an interviewer on the panel, that's the question I would have asked her. Give me your plan up until retirement.
Yeah.
Right? And it would have been convincing enough for her to score number 1.
The second thing I would say is that the role of the police is to put the lid on the boiling pot, I'd imagine, the cauldron that's boiling. But on the other hand, there's a soft approach to crime when you look at the causes of crime. My question would be whether Parliament provides a sufficient forum for real engagement to, some of the low-hanging fruits that we could agree on. Because, I like to think most people are decent people. We all want the best for our families, our neighbors, and so on. Things like how family structures are. The family is obviously under pressure. The extended family are now the nuclear. The extended family could no longer support the nuclear. If there is no nuclear family, granny is probably catching the tail to actually mind grandson. You could no longer easily send. There's so many discussions that we need to have. I'm wondering if Parliament, when you bring motions and so on, if there is sufficient debate on some of the low-hanging fruits which we can agree on, to find some kind of common ground. Any thoughts on that, or any improvements needed?
Well, let me add again, Sean. In my view, the media loves to use Parliament as I use the word as a whipping tool, because the opposition is part of Parliament, and they like to say, well, the opposition and this government likes to say the opposition doesn't support legislation, etc., in crime fighting issues, and we are saying, and I listened to Israel Khan this morning in one of the radio stations, and he's correct. Why do the government is in charge. The government needs to perform. The government is in control of issues of the family life and so forth. So, for example, under the PP government, under the Honorable Kamala Prasad Desessa, simple example was in the skills training in skills training curriculum, or the schools or the TechVoc institutions that was under the Ministry of Tertiary and Education and Skills. We had a very vibrant skills training centers and institutions, NESE, MIC, YTEP. They were very vibrant. I was chairman of MIC at one point in time under the PP government, and we used to graduate over 4,000 to 5,000 young men and children who not everyone could be a university graduate or go on to university, but there's a skills training aspect that assisted this country and gave these young men and women a hope. What happened when this government came into play? This government eradicated a lot of those programs. They closed down a lot of these centers, and now they're playing catch up by trying to cut and shape it under Minister Foster Cummins, under National Skills and Development for the Youth and so forth. But it's the same. It's 7 years too late. They should have never, and that's the issue that I have. This government or any government need to keep programs that are good for the country. And the youth, which is what is happening now in respect to crime, an element of crime, they are hopeless. Right? So for the past 7 years, they have eradicated and destroyed a lot of those young programs from, that now this government is playing catch up again. Just like the laptop program in education, if that was still in place when we went through the COVID issue, we would have been far ahead of the game.
There's also the question of how Parliament is structured and how does this government see Parliament. In my view, this government sees Parliament as a rubber stamp agency. And that is why the Joint Select Committee on National Security is chaired by a government MP. In the past, chairman was Fitzgerald Hines. And he asked the question, how could you, if you want to have serious accountability of a ministry, i.e. national security, do you really think that a minister, putting a government minister in charge of that Joint Select Committee as chairman, who decides the agenda, who could delay things, who could ignore things and whatnot? It seems to me that decision by the government, the Rowley administration, tells me that in national security, they want absolute control and minimal oversight. So we ask a question, Parliament really is about legislation. And I could speak for myself. I've made thousands of what I consider eminently reasonable, not the best, not one has been accepted by the government. We have a line by line review of the budget where we go through each line and all the MPs come up with, sometimes, but invariably we come up with good ideas. In the 7 years I've been in Parliament, and all our MPs from this group, this cohort, and the previous cohort, not one idea. And I could challenge the chief whip on that side to tell me any idea that was accepted. And that tells me that they do not see it as a serious institution for oversight and accountability.
Any more questions, Sean? No?
I believe you have one question. In recent weeks, we've seen arrests in Venezuela, including that of the Minister of Energy. What impact do you think that will have on the Dragon gas deal here in Trinidad? And secondly, you mentioned the lack of incentives by the government for oil and gas production. What would you like to see the government doing to incentivize the sector?
Let me take the last question first. Where you talk about this government for the last 7 years in our energy sector has decimated it because of lack of incentives. And really and truly, if you look at under the PP government, led by the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar between 2010 and 2015, if Mrs. Persad-Bissessar as Prime Minister did not give the kind of incentives in our energy sector, along with Minister Ramnarayan, who was the Minister of Energy, we would have been this country would have been in such worse off position, because some of those incentives that have borne fruit in the last 7 years under the PNM government is what this country is basically sustained by, right? So that what we would like to see is proper incentives with the energy sector. We have some giant energy players in our country who have been here for years. Some of them right now feel they're not being given a fair share herein by this government. It's just lip service in the last 7 years. And when we come back into power with Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, we will bring back the kind of incentives and work with the energy sector and the energy players to ensure that they do not leave our shores and keep developing our gas and oil sector for the benefit of our Trinidad and Tobago, for the city of Trinidad and Tobago, to generate the kind of revenues that we should be earning now that we are not earning because of the high prices. And your first question was respect to, was that?
The arrest in Venezuela.
Oh yeah, the one in Venezuela with the Dragon gas. Well, and that's why maybe this present government has gone silent, because the kind of couture that is happening over in Venezuela, especially in the energy sector, that we are dependent on, or this government is dependent on. One has to figure out does the Venezuelan government go from, whether they're going to continue discussions with this present government. They seem to be having a lot of issues themselves in the energy sector, and it's only time will tell what will happen with that whole Dragon gas deal that this government seems to be banking on. I just want to add before we close, I don't know if there are any other questions.
One question, thank you, Charles. Thank you, Charles. Next week, Monday, Dr. Rowley will host a regional symposium on the topic of violence as a public health issue, the crime challenge that will be held at the Higher Regency.
The PNM administration is all about PR, gallerying, obfuscating, kicking the bucket down the road, creating a conversations with a public health emergency so that nothing is going to come out of it. The statistics are going to remain the same. I'm reading the Express editorial today, and I'll just quote. On Monday and Tuesday next week, Prime Minister Keith Rowley will host a regional symposium on violence as a public health issue, the crime challenge. And it continues, we look forward with great anticipation to a statement of fellow CARICOM leaders on the crime challenge as it relates to Trinidad. You and I know that he has no answers. He's clueless, but he will give a long-winded with all the phrases and all the nice things about it. But at the end of the day, when you go to it and you say, well, what are the deliverables on this speech? How is it measurably going to reduce crime, the murder rate, in 2 weeks or a month or 6 months? How is it going to deal with home invasions? You will get nothing. So I have stopped listening to Dr. Rowley and the PNM and Fitzgerald Hines and these fancy phrases. I'm too old to waste time on obfuscatory nonsense. If they come with facts, figures, deliverables, we could engage. So the short answer to is nothing will happen. And he will say nothing of substance that will reduce crime.
That's all the questions we have.
Okay, as we come to an end of our press conference today, I know we ran a little bit beyond time, but it was very MP Charles was very passionate in his security issues. I would just like to let the viewers and listeners know that stay tuned for our next press conference. I think it will be on Sunday. But before we close, and I know you're listening, soon we'll have a mid-year review, our budget in our mid-year review in a few weeks' time. And don't be surprised that issues, and I'm asking the experts and the media, when you will be critical, be analytical when that mid-year review budget comes along. Do not take what is given in front of you by Minister of Finance and the other ministers, and you go back to the original budget that was presented back in October or in September 2022, and then you work forward. So be analytical. And I asked this country because there were certain things that we as an opposition would have asked for, in that same standing finance committee that Rodney Charles spoke about, especially, and I'll give an example, the fire service area, where Rodney Charles in that standing finance committee would have asked about was the money that was allocated in 2022, was it sufficient for the fire services division? And he fought for it to be able to increase that. And today you see the fruits about what has borne fruit is that their lack of funding showed that there were not fire service appliances and maintenance being done to our fire stations in our country. And we, the opposition, bring this out, and yet we are chastised by the government, sometimes harsh by business circles, and even sometimes by the media for the kind of questions that we ask. But it is about fighting for the people of this country who voted for us as an opposition, and will continue to fight for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to thank the listeners and viewers this morning, and I would like to thank my colleagues who have been played the scene behind the scenes. I thank you very much, and stay tuned for our Sunday presser. Thank you. God bless.